The alien girl, shivered in silence, until I held her close to keep her alive. The crash on Frostmere Station. The first thing Lieutenant Zara Voss noticed when consciousness returned was the silence. Not the comfortable quiet of deep space, but the ominous absence of the steady hum that should have been emanating from the diplomatic transport's engines. The second thing she noticed was the cold, a bone-deep chill that had no business existing inside a properly functioning spacecraft. Her eyes snapped open to find herself lying on the deck of what had once been the ship's main cabin, now tilted, at a precarious angle. Emergency lighting cast everything in an eerie crimson glow, and frost was already beginning to form on the interior walls. Through the cracked viewport, she could see the jagged landscape of Frostmere Station, an abandoned ice mining facility on the edge of the Kepler system. "Ambassador?" Zara called out, pushing herself upright despite the sharp pain in her ribs. Her breath formed visible clouds in the frigid air. "Ambassador Thane?" A weak sound drew her attention to the far corner of the cabin, where a figure lay, crumpled against the bulkhead. Ambassador Lyrix Thane of the Xylonian Confederacy was barely conscious, his usually lustrous, silver-blue skin now dull and mottled with dark patches that Zara had never seen before. His crystalline hair, normally, shimmering like captured starlight, hung limp and colorless around his angular face. "Lieutenant," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "Status report?" Zara scrambled to his side, her pilot training kicking in as she assessed both their situation and his condition. "We crashed on Frostmere Station. Main power's down. Life support is running on emergency reserves." She gently examined the purple bruising spreading across his temple. "You took a nasty hit during the crash. How do you feel?" "Cold," Lyrix admitted, and something in his tone made Zara look at him more closely. In the 3 months she'd been assigned as his pilot for this diplomatic mission, she'd never heard such vulnerability in his voice. The Xylonians were known for their stoic demeanor and emotional reserve. "Very cold." That's when Zara noticed his hands. What should have been elegantly long fingers with an almost translucent quality were now rigid and darkening at the tips. Ice crystals were actually forming on his skin. "This isn't just environmental cold, is it?" she asked, her medical training from the academy finally clicking into place. "Your species, you're not adapted for extreme temperature variations." Lyrix's large opalescent eyes met hers, and she saw something she'd never expected to see in a Xylonian diplomat. Fear. "Our homeworld maintains a constant temperature range. We evolved differently than humans. Without proper thermal regulation, my biological systems will shut down within hours." Zara stood quickly, scanning the cabin for anything that might help. The emergency heating units were damaged beyond repair, sparks occasionally flying from their twisted remains. The thermal suits had been stored in a compartment that was now completely crushed. Even the emergency blankets were scattered and torn, offering little more than psychological comfort. "There has to be something," she muttered, checking the ship's emergency protocols on a flickering console. "Medical supplies, heating elements, something." "Lieutenant Voss," Lyrix said softly, causing her to turn back to him. "There is one possibility, but it requires discussing matters that my people consider deeply private." Zara knelt beside him again, noting how his breathing had become shallow and labored. "I'm listening." In our ancient history, before we developed advanced technology, Xylonians sometimes found themselves in situations requiring thermal assistance from other species. His skin seemed to shimmer faintly as he spoke, and Zara realized it was some kind of emotional response. "It is called theralis, the sharing of life warmth, but it requires sustained physical contact and a level of intimacy that our cultures rarely permit." The implications hit Zara immediately. "You mean body heat, skin-to-skin contact?" "More than that," Lyrix explained, his voice growing weaker. "Xylonian physiology can absorb and synchronize with the thermal patterns of compatible species. But the process creates a temporary neurological link. Your thoughts, emotions, even memories may become accessible to me, And mine to you. Outside, the wind howled across Frostmere's barren surface, rattling the damaged hull of their ship. The emergency lights flickered ominously as another power cell failed. Zara felt the temperature drop several more degrees, and she could see her breath growing thicker. "How long until rescue?" she asked, though she already suspected the answer. "The distress beacon is functioning, but we crashed in an uncharted debris field. Search and rescue protocols estimate 72 hours minimum for this sector." 72 hours. Zara looked at Lyrix's deteriorating condition and knew he wouldn't last 12 hours without intervention, let alone 3 days. "This Theralis process," she said carefully, "it would keep you alive?" "Yes." "But Lieutenant, I cannot ask this of you. The cultural implications alone—" "Cultural implications don't matter if we're both dead," Zara interrupted. "Besides, I've seen enough diplomatic crises to know that sometimes survival requires breaking a few rules." She began removing her outer uniform jacket, grateful for the base layer clothing that would provide some modesty while still allowing for the skin contact he described. "Tell me what I need to do." Lyrix hesitated for a long moment, and Zara could see the internal struggle playing out across his features. Finally, he began unfastening the formal diplomatic robes that were clearly designed more for appearance than practicality. "We must maximize contact at thermal regulation points," he explained, his movements slow and careful. "For humans, these are located at the wrists, neck, and torso. The process requires maintained contact for the synchronization to occur." Zara gathered the least damaged thermal blankets and arranged them into a makeshift shelter in the corner of the cabin where they'd be protected from the worst of the cold wind seeping through the hull breaches. The emergency lighting cast strange shadows as she worked, and she tried to focus on the practical aspects of their situation, rather than the unprecedented intimacy they were about to share. When she turned back to Lyrix, she found him sitting, with his back against the bulkhead, having removed his outer robes to reveal skin that seemed to glow faintly from within. Up close, she could see the intricate patterns of what looked like veins or neural pathways running just beneath the surface, pulsing weakly with a silver-blue light. "The patterns," she said, fascinated despite their dire circumstances. "They're beautiful." "They regulate thermal distribution throughout our nervous system," Lyrix explained. "But they're failing without adequate environmental heat." Zara settled beside him under the blankets, acutely aware of the temperature difference between them. His skin was cool to the touch, but not unpleasantly so, more like smooth stone that had been sitting in shade. "Is this helping?" she asked, as they arranged themselves so that her warmer human body was pressed against his side, her arm around his shoulders. "Yes," Lyrix breathed, and she could already hear the relief in his voice. "I can feel your thermal energy beginning to transfer." What he didn't mention, but what Zara began to notice almost immediately, was the strange tingling sensation where their skin made contact. It started as a gentle warmth, but gradually intensified into something that felt almost like a mild electrical current flowing between them. "The neurological connection," she said, more as a statement than a question. "It is beginning," Lyrix confirmed. "Are you prepared for this, Lieutenant?" Zara tightened her arms around him as another gust of wind shook their damaged ship. The Dobby emergency lights flickered again, and she could hear the ominous sound of more systems failing. "Ready as I'll ever be," she said. "Besides, after 3 months of trying to figure out Xylonian diplomatic protocols, maybe having direct access to your thoughts will finally help me understand what you're actually thinking during those trade negotiations." Despite everything, Lyrix made a sound that might have been laughter. "I fear you may find my thoughts less mysterious than you expect." As if summoned by his words, Zara suddenly felt a flood of sensations that weren't entirely her own, warmth that went beyond the physical, tinged with relief, gratitude, and something else, a deep loneliness that she recognized because it mirrored her own. "Oh," she whispered, understanding now why this process was considered so intimate among his people. "Yes," Lyrix said softly. "Now you begin to see." Outside their makeshift shelter, Frostmere Station's main power core gave a shuddering groan that echoed through the facility's abandoned corridors. The sound was followed by an ominous silence, and then the emergency lighting went out completely, plunging them into absolute darkness as their thermal bond deepened and their two very different worlds began to merge in ways neither had ever imagined possible. Hearts in the cold void in the absolute darkness of their failing ship, Zara discovered that the Theralis bond created more than just shared warmth. It opened doorways between minds that she hadn't known could exist. Through the connection, she experienced fragments of Lyrix's memories like scattered starlight, the crystalline spires of his homeworld Xylonia, the weight of diplomatic responsibility he carried, and beneath it all, a profound sense of isolation that came from being perpetually caught between worlds. "Your loneliness," she whispered into the darkness, her voice barely audible above the wind. "It's not just from being away from home, is it?" She felt his surprise ripple through the bond before he answered. "Diplomats of my people are chosen young and trained to exist in the spaces between cultures. We become neither fully Xylonian nor capable of truly understanding other species. Until now." Through their shared consciousness, Zara suddenly understood the careful distance Lyrix had maintained during their 3 months of travel, the formal politeness that she'd interpreted as coldness. He hadn't been rejecting connection. He'd been protecting himself from wanting something he believed impossible. "I can feel your memories too," Lyrix said softly, and Zara realized he was experiencing her own carefully buried emotions. "The mining accident that killed your family. That's why you became a pilot, to stay moving, never settling anywhere long enough to risk that kind of loss again." The accuracy of his insight should have been uncomfortable, but instead Zara felt a strange relief at being truly seen. "Funny how we both ended up in jobs that keep us isolated," she murmured. "Perhaps not so coincidental," Lyrix replied, and she could feel his amusement through the bond. "The universe has a way of bringing together souls that recognize each other." Hours passed in the darkness, their body heat creating a small pocket of survival while ice continued to form on the outer walls of their shelter. The Theralis bond had stabilized, and Zara could feel Lyrix's vital signs strengthening as his body synchronized with her thermal patterns. But more than that, she was beginning to understand the depth of connection his people were capable of. Emotions and thoughts flowing between them like a gentle tide. "Tell me about the patterns on your skin," she said, tracing one of the silvery lines that ran along his collarbone. In the darkness, they seemed to pulse with their own faint light. "Neural pathways," he explained, and she could feel his contentment at her touch. "They carry both thermal regulation and emotional resonance throughout our bodies. Among my people, they're considered deeply private. To show them is to reveal one's entire emotional state. And yet you're showing them to me." "I had little choice initially," Lyrix admitted. "But now, I find I want you to see them, to see me." The intimacy of the confession sent warmth through both their bodies, and Zara realized that somewhere, in the process of saving his life, she'd begun falling for this enigmatic being who was so different from her yet understood her completely. Sudden sound from outside their shelter broke the moment. The distant hum of engines approaching through Frostmere's atmosphere. "Rescue," Zara breathed, feeling a complex mix of relief and unexpected disappointment through their bond. "They're early," Lyrix said, and she could sense his own conflicted emotions. "The distress beacon must have been more effective than we calculated." They began the careful process of separating, both acutely aware that breaking the Theralis bond too quickly could be dangerous for Lyrix's newly stabilized system. Even apart, Zara could still feel echoes of his presence in her mind, like a song heard from another room. The rescue ship's lights swept across their crashed vessel as it landed nearby, and soon they could hear voices calling through the station's corridors. Captain Marcus Webb led the search team, his weathered face showing relief when his flashlight found them in their makeshift shelter. Lieutenant Voss, Ambassador Thane. "Thank the stars you're alive," Webb said. His medical officer, Dr. Finn Rodriguez, immediately moving to assess their conditions. "We've been searching for 18 hours. How did you survive the temperature drop?" Zara and Lyrix exchanged a glance, both aware of the cultural and professional complications their survival method would create. Emergency thermal conservation. Protocols, Zara said carefully. We pooled our body heat and found adequate shelter. Dr. Rodriguez frowned as he took readings from his medical scanner. Ambassador, your thermal signatures are unusual. There are traces of what looks like neurological synchronization in your system. I've never seen anything like it. A side effect of extreme cold exposure on Xylonian physiology, Lyrix replied smoothly, though Zara could sense his tension. It should normalize once I'm returned to appropriate environmental conditions. The rescue proceeded efficiently, but as they were helped aboard the medical transport, Zara noticed Lyrix beginning to show signs of distress. His skin patterns, which had been glowing softly since their bonding, began to fade again, and she could feel phantom echoes of his discomfort. Doctor, she said urgently as Lyrix swayed on his feet, something's wrong. Rodriguez's scanner began beeping frantically as Lyrix's vital signs plummeted. His thermal regulation is failing again. It's like his body learned to depend on an external heat source and can't function without it. The bond, Zara whispered, understanding immediately. It's not just about shared warmth. His system synchronized with mine. Breaking it too quickly is causing a cascade failure. Without hesitation, she moved to Lyrix's side, taking his hands in hers. The moment their skin made contact, his vital signs began to stabilize, and she felt the familiar tingle of their neurological connection reestablishing. Captain Webb stared at them with growing comprehension. This is more than standard survival protocols, isn't it? Lyrix straightened, his diplomatic training reasserting itself despite his physical vulnerability. Captain, I invoke cultural privacy provisions under interspecies diplomatic immunity. The specific methods of our survival are protected under Xylonian law. Understood, Ambassador, Webb replied, though his expression suggested he knew there was more to the story. Dr. Rodriguez, can you maintain the ambassador's health during transport? As long as Lieutenant Voss maintains physical contact, his condition appears stable, the doctor reported. Though I'd recommend a full medical evaluation once we reach the starbase. The journey back to civilization took 2 days, during which Zara never left Lyrix's side. Their bond had evolved beyond the desperate survival mechanism it had begun as, becoming something neither of them had words for. Through their connection, they shared not just thoughts and emotions but dreams and hopes for a future that suddenly seemed possible. What happens when we reach the starbase? Zara asked on their final night aboard the rescue ship. They were alone in the medical bay, her hand resting over his heart where she could feel the steady rhythm that had become as familiar as her own. Officially, I complete my diplomatic mission and return to Xylonia. You receive a commendation for exceptional service under extreme circumstances. And unofficially? Lyrix was quiet for a long moment, his fingers tracing patterns on her palm. Unofficially, I have a proposal for the Confederacy Council about establishing a new kind of diplomatic position, one that requires permanent assignment to human space with a dedicated human liaison. Zara smiled in the darkness. That sounds like it would require someone with experience in interspecies relations. Indeed, someone who has already proven capable of understanding Xylonian physiology and culture at the most intimate level. The Council will approve this. The Theralis bond is sacred among my people, Lyrix explained. Once established, it's considered a permanent connection that transcends political boundaries. They will not only approve it, they will insist upon it. 6 months later, Lieutenant Zara Voss stood on the observation deck of Starbase Meridian, watching a sleek Xylonian diplomatic vessel dock with practiced precision. Her new uniform bore the insignia of the Interspecies Cultural Exchange Division, a position that had been created specifically for her unique qualifications. Ambassador Lyrix Thane emerged from the docking bay, his silver-blue skin radiant with health and his crystalline hair catching the station's lights like captured starfire. The moment he saw her, the patterns beneath his skin began to glow with the soft luminescence she had learned meant joy. Lieutenant, he began formally, then stopped as she held up her hand. Actually, it's director now, Zara said with a smile. Director of Xylonian Cultural Affairs. I have it on good authority that the position comes with some very interesting benefits, such as a permanent posting that requires close collaboration with a certain Xylonian diplomat, she said, stepping closer until she could feel the familiar warmth of their bond beginning to resonate, and living quarters designed to accommodate unique thermal regulation requirements. Lyrix's eyes brightened with amusement and something deeper. The council was very specific about those requirements. Something about maintaining the health and well-being of bonded individuals. Bonded individuals, Zara repeated, savoring the official recognition of what they had become. I like the sound of that. As they walked together toward their new shared quarters, Zara reflected on how a crash landing on a frozen world had led not just to survival, but to a connection that had literally rewritten the rules of interspecies. Diplomacy. The universe, it seemed, had indeed brought together two souls who recognized each other, even if it had taken a life-threatening situation for them to realize it. Behind them, the stars continued their eternal dance through the cosmos, indifferent to the small miracle of two very different beings who had found warmth in each other's hearts even in the cold void of space.